4 and module 5. They are interlinked. That's why I am taking them together. The basics of digital communication, why to digitize analog sources, how to digitize. There are two basic steps, sampling and quantization. How you use those steps in digitizing analog sources, and analysis, mathematical analysis of this sampling process we are going to study. And then pulse amplitude modulation. So in pulse modulation, we have different techniques. In that, we'll be talking about pulse amplitude modulation in detail because it is part of the sampling process. And later on, we'll talk about another type of pulse modulation known as pulse position modulation, PPM. So generally, we'll be talking of these two types. But in order to understand what is PPM, we also have to go through the second pulse modulation process, which is known as pulse width modulation, also called pulse duration modulation. So when we try to digitize analog sources, it can happen as discretization first and then complete digitization. So converting from analog to discrete means you are going to discretize only the x-axis. You will keep the y-axis as continuous, analog in nature. Only the x-axis is digitized, then we call it as discrete. Okay. And if you are going to consider both y-axis and x-axis for a signal in steps or in numbers, then it is digital. So difference between discrete and digital we have discussed before also. Please remember that difference. And based on that, here we will first convert it to discrete and then digital. So many steps are involved in that. And in module 5, we will continue with what is quantization and what happens when we quantize a discrete signal, and then how to perform digital modulation on a discretized signal. How you can perform pulse code modulation. It's a digital modulation technique. And then an advanced version of pulse code modulation or PCM called as delta modulation. What is delta modulation? And it was basically designed to overcome one disadvantage of PCM. What is that disadvantage and how delta modulation helps us overcome that disadvantage? All that we'll be studying. And then we'll take up some application examples where we'll be talking about video encoding using MPEG encoders. We do MPEG. Anybody can tell me the full form of MPEG? Somebody? What is JPEG? You save images and all pictures in JPEG, MPEG formats, right? What's JPEG full form and MPEG full form? Yes?
Motion Pictures Expert Group.
Exactly, you're right. And JPEG?
Joint Photographic Experts Group.
Joint Photographers Expert Group. That was the initial format, which was, so a set of photographers or photographing experts joined together, and they said images could be saved in this format, and they came with all the details. That's why all images which were saved in that format was called JPEG. Okay, JPG or JPEG format. Later on, only images, saving images wasn't sufficient for us because we wanted videos, moving pictures. So motion had to be captured. And that's when the MPEG group came into existence. Motion Pictures Expert Group came into existence. And how video can be converted and saved in MPEG format and how it is done, we'll be discussing as an application example. And another interesting example is vocoders. Full form of vocoder is voice coder, where our voice is encoded, transmitted, and then decoded. These vocoders are also very efficient in that both these, whether it is MPEG or vocoder, they will try to compress the information also along with encoding. Say they do encoding also, they compress also, hence helping in saving bandwidth, and they help us in transmitting minimized data. Anyway, so for video it is MPEG, for voice it is a vocoder, which is quite an interesting module which we are going to study. So these are the things which you can expect to study, and the reference textbook remains the same. Everything is there from chapter 7 in the prescribed textbook only, Communication System by Simon Haken and Moher, Michael B. Moher, 5th edition. So chapter 7 is there almost completely, including module 4 and 5. You see 7.1 to 7.7 for module 4, 7.8 to 7.11, and only this topic, vocoders topic, is taken from the reference textbook, that is 6.8 in this reference book 1, which is Lathi. So BP Lathi, Modern Digital and Analog Communication System by BP Lathi, I told you in the beginning itself, is a very, very good textbook in communication. If at all your fundamentals should be strong in communication, you should read this book. It is a real good book in communication. And from that book, we are going to understand vocoders. Okay. The rest all are from your prescribed textbook. Now coming to, let's take up this whole thing as pulse modulation techniques. Okay. These are the topics which we will study initially. Now, as I told you in the beginning itself, this is a transitional chapter between analog and digital communication, or analog and digital modulation techniques. Till now, we studied all various analog modulation techniques like amplitude modulation and angle modulation. And in angle modulation, phase and frequency modulation. We studied in detail all those techniques. We also studied the effect of noise on all these techniques. Now, we can move on to, that's what, the transition should happen from analog to digital. Why it should happen and why we need digital modulation, all that, let's see. So as we are aware till now, in continuous wave modulation or analog modulation, one parameter of the sinusoidal carrier wave is continuously varied in accordance with a given message signal. Whether that parameter is amplitude, phase, or frequency, that is angle, it is our choice depending on the application. Whereas in pulse modulation technique, the carrier becomes a pulse train, a periodic pulse train, and some parameter of that pulse train will be changed in accordance with the message. So the major difference between continuous wave and pulse modulation is in terms of the carrier. Carrier is a continuous sine wave in analog or continuous wave modulation. It becomes a pulse train in pulse modulation. And the concept remains the same. You vary one of the parameters of the carrier in accordance with the message. So in the first part of communication system, we studied all analog waveforms with analog sources. We studied why modulation is necessary. So without modulation, we can't transmit long distance. We can't multiplex. Noise and interference will be high, and antenna heights will be more. All those things we saw. So we need to modulate. What types of modulation we studied? As we have already discussed, amplitude and angle modulation. And for each modulation type, we discussed the basic definition, equation, in time domain, equation in frequency domain, waveforms in time and frequency domain, generation of that particular modulated signal, detection of that particular modulated signal, and also the effects of noise on that particular modulated signal. So all these things we spoke of for each of the modulation techniques, right? Now coming to this digital communication techniques, first we have to study two major topics, that is analog waveforms which are transmitted using baseband signals, and then digital waveforms coming from digital sources that can be transmitted with baseband signals. Initially, we'll study transmission using baseband signals. Baseband means low frequency, right? The message signals as they are without any modulation. Later on, we'll study about modulation. Now comes the question, why digital? Can you tell me why we need to go to digital? Yes. I told you your involvement in the class matters for your internals. We keep noting who answers. Please speak up. Why we need to go from analog to digital? What are the advantages in digital? This you have analyzed so many times, right? Yes? Why do we need to go to digital?
Accuracy and proper output, ma'am.
Okay. Higher accuracy. Fine.
Ma'am, encoding is possible.
Encoding is possible. You're right.
Digital circuits are more reliable.
Digital circuits are more reliable. Yeah, to some extent true.
Less data corruption due to noise.
Less effect of noise. Fine. What else? Low cost. None of you mentioned. All digital circuits come with very low cost because they are implemented using simple switches. Easy to design. Very true. What else? Privacy. We are talking about communication on a common channel or medium. So there are so many millions and trillions of people communicating every day using this common channel. Each of us want to maintain our own privacy. Nobody should listen in to our communication with somebody else. Unless it is intended for them, they needn't understand what is happening, even if they try to listen. This privacy protection also happens with encryption and decryption. So all these are multiple advantages of why we need to go to digital, right? So digital approximation of analog signals can be very precise or accurate. Low cost. Flexibility is another important advantage. So digital circuits are highly flexible. We can also combine analog and digital circuits and sources and transmit them using digital lines. And also multiplexing, we have very efficient digital multiplexing techniques, low cost, highly effective digital multiplexing rather than analog. With analog, we have only FDM and TDM to some extent, but TDM is better with digital. Increased efficiency because we are trying to encode and decode. We'll do source encoding to remove redundancy in the data. Yes or no? So lots of redundancy will be there in the data that can be removed by doing source encoding of the data. You've studied in ITC so many source encoding techniques. Then you do channel coding. Why do you do channel coding? What is channel coding and why it is done? ITC. Speak up fast. Why you take so much time? Channel coding is done to what? Detect and correct for errors. The other name for channel coding is error control coding. Yes or no? You do additional encoding. So what are the examples of source coding? Your Shannon code, Shannon Fano, all Huffman, all these are RLE, run length encoding we call. There are so many schemes. They are all examples of source encoding techniques. Which are the examples of channel encoding techniques? Linear block codes, cyclic codes, convolutional codes. All these are examples of channel encoders. And they are basically done to help us to overcome errors induced by the channel and in the receiver. We saw the effect of noise added in the channel and receiver, and we showed in analog schemes how we can improve the signal to noise ratio at the output. Figure of merit. Here, that figure of merit can be much better, especially when we are doing digital transmission. We can improve that to a great extent if we can add some additional data bits when we send, and those data bits are exclusively used to help us identify errors and correct them. Redundant bits or check bits you call them, right? All this you're familiar. So efficiency is very high because we can do source coding and channel coding. And what is multimedia communication? What's the difference between normal communication and multimedia data? Normal data and multimedia. Yes? What do you understand by the term multimedia? What is multi? Each word is directly linked to its meaning. Multi means many. What are media? Media can be in the form of what? Data. It can be in the form of voice. It can be in the form of video. So many things. Everything clubbed together we are sending today. Look at the communication. The communication which we are having just now. I am sending you data in the form of this whatever is traveling in the line. You're seeing a video, right? So we are able to send video, audio, everything is merged as one unit and everything is being transmitted. Initially, we had to send data, means data was separate. Video was separate. Here, everything could be mixed or merged and transmitted on a common transmission line as one unit, though they will be handled differently in the network. You'll study later in communication networks or computer networks how each signal will be handled in a different way. All cannot be given the same treatment. But with all this, we can club everything, combine different forms of data and transmit. That is multimedia communication. So actual digital data, voice, video, everything clubbed together could be transmitted. And that is possible only because of digital communication. And we discussed it should be less affected by noise, distortion, interference. It doesn't mean that noise and distortion doesn't affect it. It affects, but we have better techniques to handle them. In analog, the way we handle the noise or distortion is not so matured and not so easy and not efficient. Whereas in digital, we have very, very efficient processing techniques to deal with the induced noise, interference, or distortion. That's what we mean by this. Naturally, better privacy because we can do encryption and decryption on the data. We can hide the essence of the actual data traveling on the line. And now let's distinguish between what is analog pulse modulation and digital pulse modulation. So analog pulse modulation, or what did I say? Discrete modulation. Here, a periodic pulse train is used as the carrier wave. and a parameter, one of the parameters of that periodic pulse train, either amplitude or width or duration, we call it as the timing, width or duration or position. These are the three parameters which we are going to vary in accordance with a continuous message signal. Okay. So that continuous message can be continuous throughout, or it can be a sample of the continuous message signal. But all these parameters will be varied continuously. Please remember, y-axis is continuous, x-axis is discrete in this. So information is basically transmitted in the analog form, but at discrete times. That's what I intend to say. Your y-axis is continuous or analog, x-axis is discrete. So the time is discrete, the amplitudes are analog. That is analog pulse modulation. Okay. Now, digital pulse modulation. Here the message is represented in a discrete way in both time as well as amplitude. Both x and y axis are discrete, or they are represented in steps, time as well as amplitude. So sequence of coded pulses will be transmitted in this technique, and that is called digital pulse modulation. Or this is complete digital modulation, where the signal has been completely digitized both in x as well as y axis, amplitude and time. But in this analog pulse modulation, the amplitude is still continuous, only the x axis or time is discrete. Now let's move on to Shannon's. We all know this anyway, channel coding theorem. Shannon's channel coding theorem. Can you tell me the relation? What is that Shannon-Hartley law? Anybody? I think by now you have already studied module 3 is complete, right? In ITC?
No, ma'am. She went directly to module 4.
After 2.
Channel coding is not there.
Okay, you did 2 and then 4.
Yeah, ma'am. 2 and then 4.
Okay. So channel coding can help reduce the error probability without reducing the data rate. That's the essence of channel encoding. And the data rate depends on the channel itself. We call it as channel capacity. And we have Shannon's theorem to understand this channel capacity. What is the maximum capacity of any channel? Let's say the channel has a bandwidth W, the input signal power P, and noise power is usually N0. If I take the noise power totally, N0 into W in the message bandwidth, then the capacity of the channel can be written in terms of C is equal to W log 1 plus SNR. So actually the standard form of this equation is something like this. Channel capacity. Channel capacity is a measure of the rate at which data can travel through a channel. Data can be sent on a channel. Okay, that is channel capacity. It is given as bandwidth B log of 1 plus signal to noise ratio, log to the base 2. Here the bandwidth of the signal is W. Okay, so the bandwidth allotted to the signal in the channel is W, and P represents the signal power, N0 into W represents the noise power. So the standard equation given by Shannon is this. This is also called as the Shannon-Hartley law, or the Shannon's law for sending data, digital data efficiently on any channel. Okay, it is bandwidth log of 1 plus s by n. This is very, very important, and whenever we transmit digital data, we have to ensure that the rate at which we are going to send the data will always be much lesser than the actual capacity of the channel. Say the channel can handle the data at the rate of 1 Mbps, then you should send it at a rate much less than 1 Mbps. We'll not go until that. Usually we try to use only half the channel capacity if we want to have reliable communication. To avoid error and all very effectively, we should try to send at a rate much less than the actual capacity of the channel. And in calculating that capacity, the bandwidth, the signal power, noise power, everything comes into picture. Okay. Now with this, let's try to understand what are the steps involved in discretizing an analog signal. So first we'll only discretize. Later on we will try to what? Digitize. So the first step is discretizing the analog signal, and the first element or the first block which helps us in doing that job is a sampler. Okay, so whenever we think of digitizing, we have to have a sampling circuit and a quantizing circuit. Here we are first discretizing, that is a sampling circuit or a sampling process is necessary. So sampling converts an analog signal into a corresponding sequence of samples which are uniformly distributed in time. So we are discretizing the x-axis. Any analog signal, you have an analog signal, it can be represented what? With a unique set of samples. Whatever the analog signal, I am representing this analog signal with a set of impulses, or I can also represent it with a set of pulses like this. So however, it's depending on the process required, you represent an analog signal using a sequence of samples which are distributed in time uniformly. So if I have this sample at time Ts, this sample will be available at time 2 Ts, this will be available at 3 Ts. It is uniformly distributed in time. Okay, this is sampling. Proper selection of sampling rate becomes very important because it tells us how uniquely the samples will represent the original signal. Remember, when we do discretization or sampling, we are going to lose portions of the original signal. The original signal is there at all instants of time, but the sampled signal will be present only at some fixed instants of time. I'm going to have the sampled signals only here. Though I can represent the original signal using these samples, the rate at which we sample becomes very important in checking whether the given samples are representing the original signal correctly or not. Okay. So if you don't sample at the right rate, you're going to lose the actual content of the original signal. It is determined according to the sampling theorem. So for us to understand sampling theorem, let us consider the following model. First, let's consider the input signal to be any arbitrary analog signal g of t, and remember it should have finite energy. Okay, and this is available or its values are specified for all instants of time. Now we are going to sample the signal instantaneously at a uniform rate, which means once every Ts seconds. I'm going to take a sample of the original analog signal once every Ts seconds. Then we are going to obtain an infinite sequence of samples which are spaced ts seconds apart, and we call them as g of nts, because I'm going to, n is the set of all possible integer values. Depending on the value of n, I'm going to get the samples. And ts is called the sampling period. Fs is known as the sampling rate. So you should understand what is sampling rate. The sampling rate is nothing but it is inverse of the sampling period, which is 1 by ts. Okay. So Fs is 1 by ts, and only when we sample at the proper rate, we'll be able to recover the original information in the analog signal correctly. Let's consider G delta of t to denote the sampled signal. And how do we get this G delta of t? We'll check out next. So basically, what is this sampling process? You see, we have an analog signal G of t, and
What is G delta of t?
What is?
G delta of t.
Yeah, G delta of t represents the sampled signal. You see here in the waveform.
G of NTS, is that G delta of t?
No, G of NTS is not G delta of t exactly. I'll show you later. Okay. They are, G of NTS is slightly different from G delta of t. We'll see that. First you see here, G of t is the analog signal like this. Now, let me take a periodic impulse train with impulses every ts apart. So what is an impulse train? Impulse train is one where impulses are present every sampling time apart. The sampling time is ts. So at every duration ts, at every time ts, I'm going to have one impulse, 4 ts like this, so on. And likewise in this side also, minus ts, minus 2 ts, minus 3 ts, so on. So let me call this as Gi of t, a periodic impulse train. Now, if I take this periodic impulse train and multiply it with this given signal G of t, the result what I'm going to get is your sampled signal G delta of t. So G delta of t represents the sampled signal. G of t is the given analog signal. Gi of t is a periodic impulse train where we take impulse samples at every ts seconds. Once in every ts seconds, I have impulses existing. Now you just multiply this impulse train with the given signal. The result what you get is, I'm going to get impulses which are what? Varying in the shape of this message. This should be like this. So impulses which are varying in the shape of the given message. So we have discretized this analog signal in the time domain, but in the y-axis, in the amplitude domain, I can have any amplitude. Say the amplitude at this point was 3.1 volt. Here also it will be 3.1. And if this is say 2.5, here also it will be the same. That means I'm not taking steps. I'm not taking fixed intervals or steps in the y-axis, but in the x-axis, I'm taking fixed steps of time. That is one sample every ts seconds. Okay. We call this G delta of t as the instantaneously sampled version of the analog signal. Is this clear till this point? Now, let's try to define what is sampling theorem before we proceed to the equations. Yeah, I've missed writing what is sampling theorem. Please write down. I'll tell you orally. Just note down what is sampling theorem. A band limited signal sampling theorem states that a band limited signal having no spectral components above FM or W. So a band limited signal having no spectral components, or let's say having frequency less than W or FM if it is a single tone message, can be sampled uniformly at intervals of Ts, which is 1 by Fs also. Okay, it can be sampled uniformly at intervals of time Ts. Then it can be transmitted and recovered completely by using let's say by using these samples, values of these samples, by using values of these samples only if the sampling interval only if the sample interval is greater than or equal to 1 by 2 FM or 1 by 2 W, where W is the bandwidth of the given message. This one, G of T. Whatever is G of T, and this G of T in the frequency domain will have some highest frequency component W. Okay, G of F, if it is like this W represents the highest frequency component of the message. So the sampling interval should be 1 by 2 FM or 1 by 2 W, or in other words, if I write in terms of sampling rate, the sampling frequency or sampling rate should be greater than or equal to 2 W, or for single tone 2 FM. Okay, so this is the essence of sampling theorem. So what does sampling theorem tell us? Sampling theorem tells us any band limited signal which has its highest frequency component less than W can be sampled uniformly at intervals every time period Ts. Then it can be transmitted. So those samples can be transmitted, and at the receiver we can recover back the original signal completely and recover the given band limited signal completely by using values of these samples, provided we have sampled at a rate which is more than 2 times the highest bandwidth of the message. Fs should be greater than or equal to 2 W or 2 FM, or Ts should be 1 by 2 W or 1 by 2 FM. Only when we sample at this rate, I told you sampling rate becomes very important. The sampling period, which in other words tells us the sampling rate. So it becomes a very important parameter in telling us when we can recover the signal properly. Unless you can recover the signal properly, there is no point in transmitting and receiving, right? So our sampling theorem gives us details of how we can sample using some pulse train or impulse train, and how we can send those samples and recover correctly at the receiving end. Is this clear? So this is called sampling theorem. Let's take some equations or expressions. So analog signal g of t here, anyway, I've already represented here. Analog signal g of t is as shown. There is a periodic impulse train gi of t, GIM or GI, anything we can use, GI of t. And the sampled signal G delta of t is shown below. How do we get this sampled signal G delta of t? By multiplying G of t, the given signal, with the impulse train GI of t. So G delta of t is nothing but G of t into GI of t. Okay. First equation, product of these two, multiply these two, you get G delta of t, this one. So what do we do? How do I represent GI of t in the time domain? How is a periodic impulse train represented? I can take it as a sum of what? Time shifted impulses. And by how much are they shifted? Each impulse is shifted by what? N times Ts. Ts is the sampling time for each impulse. The time difference between successive impulse is the sampling time Ts. So the first impulse I am getting at 0. The second one, here n is 0. When n becomes 1, I am getting a right shifted impulse delta t minus Ts. This one. This represents the impulse delta t minus Ts. Right. And the second one is represented by delta t minus 2Ts. So n becomes 2. And if I want a left shifted impulse, what should happen? Your n value, the multiplier here becomes minus 1. So here to get this impulse, n is minus 1. So you're going to get delta t minus of minus or t plus Ts. Correct? This one is delta t plus 2Ts. So every impulse can be represented like delta t minus nTs, where n is an integer. N represents an integer which will have the value from all negative numbers, 0 and positive values. So I get a train of impulses or a series of impulses in the impulse train, which can be represented using this summation delta t minus nTs in the time domain. Okay. Now I have represented GI. I know I have a signal G of t. I should get G delta of t, the sampled signal, by multiplying G of t with GI of t. Sampled signal is obtained as G of t into GI of t. GI of t is summation delta t minus nTs. And all these are represented in the first three waveforms, the time domain waveforms. I hope you can see these waveforms clearly. Okay. If you have any doubts, please ask. So these are the time domain waveforms for the given signal. Now the same thing in frequency domain if we have to write. We know usually we work with both time and frequency domains together in communication. So I need to write G delta of f. And usually the notation used, we use capital notation. So capital G delta of f, it's a function of frequency now. This G of t, let's consider G of t and G of f are Fourier transform pairs. So I'll replace G of t with its Fourier transform pair G of f. Multiplication should be replaced with a convolution operation. And the Fourier transform of this periodic impulse train becomes delta f minus nfs. T we are just changing to f. You can just try out this at home. Go home and check out how to find the Fourier transform of a periodic impulse train. So the Fourier transform will be the same thing, except I have this scaling factor fs or 1 by ts along with this. Here there is no, the scaling factor is just 1. Remember, what is the relationship between time and frequency? T is 1 by F or F is 1 by T. So usually I'm going to, when I convert it to frequency domain, this part will remain delta F minus NFS. Okay. But I will get an added scaling factor of 1 by Ts, which we have written outside. Summation as usual from minus infinity to plus infinity. Okay. And finally, how do I simplify this convolution of G of F with the summation of impulses? These are frequency shifted impulses. Here 1 by Ts is nothing but Fs. And remember, with different properties of the delta function or the impulse function, we know the convolution of any other function with an impulse function will result in that particular function existing where the impulse existed. So if I have convolution of any function with an impulse, then this function will be present only at the point where the impulse was there. Say the impulse was there at this point. So the given function will now exist only at that point. That is an important property of impulse functions. And when I told you that, I told you, remember, this is very much useful in sampling. And it is also called the sifting or sampling property of the impulse. So the sifting or sampling property tells us that any function multiplied with an impulse results in that function existing where the impulse exists. So what is happening to this? This G of F convolved with summation delta F minus NFS becomes G of F minus NFS. That's all. And this is one of the expressions for the frequency domain representation of an impulse train or of a sampled signal, let me say. So just before ending up, we'll see what's the time. Okay, I think we have another 10 minutes. So here, the given signal G of F, G of T is a band limited signal, we said. So its frequency domain representation will be something like this, as shown here. Okay, so the frequency domain representation of G of T is this G of F, and its limit is from 0 to W. Okay, and Gi of F, that is the equivalent for what? The Fourier transform of the periodic impulse train Gi of T. We had Gi of T here. Gi of F represents the periodic impulse train Fourier transform. So we know that is also an impulse train only. We saw that the Fourier transform of this signal is still going to be an impulse train in the frequency domain. It will give us shifted impulses. So one impulse at 0, one at Fs. Here n is an integer, one at 2 Fs and so on. Here again, one at minus Fs, one at minus 2 Fs, so on. So we are representing this equation, delta F minus NFS. That is Gi of F, Fourier transform of the impulse train. Now, in the end, what will G delta of F be? We said it is G of F. This is G of F. G of F existing wherever the impulse exists. So there is an impulse here. I should have a G of F here. There is an impulse at Fs, another G of F here. There is an impulse at 2 Fs, another G of F here, likewise. So everywhere there is an impulse, we have the given signal G of F. So this represents our Fourier transform of the sampled signal, also known as G delta of F. Okay. So please try to understand these waveforms and try to analyze. We'll continue with this in the next class. Okay. So today we have dealt with the basics of what is sampling theorem, why we need to digitize analog signal, What are the pulse modulation techniques? We have pulse analog modulation and pulse digital modulation. Under pulse analog modulation, we can have pulse amplitude, pulse duration, and pulse position, 3 types. Under pulse digital modulation, both amplitude and time are digitized or discretized. Under that, we'll be studying pulse code modulation, delta modulation, adaptive delta, so on. Okay. So these, then finally we spoke about what is sampling theorem, how you can send a signal, any band limited signal, if you are sampling it at intervals of TS. And when you transmit, you will be able to recover the signal properly or completely only if you sample at a rate which is greater than twice the message bandwidth. Okay, remember that. And we saw the basic equations regarding sampling. Okay, let's stop here today and let's continue tomorrow.